Off-world, Bima's tribute.
Come on.
Vardy Ogawirn said. There was no emotion in his voice. This wasn't up for discussion. At the end of the third week of every month, it was time to offer tribute to Bima. This tribute bought everyone another month of operating out of West Sec. The sprawling maze of old, disused factories and warehouses, the tower blocks to the east acted as a barrier between them and the wider city of Zelis. The scrap wall to the west was a barrier between Zelis and the Dead Zone. West Sec, or the Western Wastes as it was commonly referred to, was what would have been a pre-war industrial hub. The reconstruction efforts created homes for many citizens who were then supposed to restart the factories to aid the rebuilding efforts. Bima, however, had other ideas. Not wanting to lose control to the Jex government, he got to work pushing them out of what he considered his territory. The entire sector turned into a war zone. Theft, ambushes, sabotage, kidnappings, and assassinations. But the bombings of key sites around Zelis were what really made them halt their efforts. Mass amounts of citizens had already been relocated to West Sec by this time, and they were then left trapped in a region ruled by Bima and all those beneath him. Kiefer Vorchia stared at the brightly lit exterior of the club. It was a shining beacon in a grim place. The lights evoked feelings of safety in an otherwise dark region. That assessment was false, a trick of the mind.
I don't want to.
Kiefer said distantly.
Can I just wait here?
He asked. He didn't look around at Virda as he spoke.
I've heard too much about this place, about Bima.
You don't want to?
Virda growled.
You like spending the money we make, though, don't you?
Well, I mean, it's...
Kiefer stammered. He watched as waves of people came and went from the building across the dockyard. Many people moved with purpose. The vast majority, however, stood in small pockets or wandered aimlessly. Addicts, drunks, gamblers. This place attracted them all. But above all else, criminals, thieves, murderers, con artists, traffickers, pit owners, slavers, smugglers, hunters. Then there were Virda and Kiefer. They fit right in, or so they should have, in theory. In the eyes of ZPD and the wider city, they were no different than the rest. Kiefer didn't think they fit in with any of them, though. They weren't on the same level in any way. It was unfair to throw them all into the same bucket. This was the only home he had known. This was where he was born, raised, and abandoned. No different than Virda. They had no choice but to do what they had to.
You're the leader. This is kind of your job. Finding places to hit, assigning jobs, dividing cuts.
He stopped for a moment.
Dropping off tribute. You've done it every other time.
Every other time I had Sanic with me. But after last month's drop-off, he said he wouldn't do it again.
Virda said, as he rattled a small container of FSTs in solid form.
Why did you think I brought you along?
Well, I didn't think you expected me to go in with you. I thought you wanted me to fly you here.
Kiefer replied.
That's it. Fly you here, you run in, drop off, then we leave. That's what I thought this was.
You were wrong. Now come on, I don't want to stay here longer than we have to.
Virda opened the side door and swung out.
Besides, you'd be in as much danger waiting around here.
He poked his head back in at Kiefer.
Alone.
He stood up straight, tucked the container under one arm, and closed the door behind him with his free hand. After walking around the front of the transporter, he gestured to Kiefer to hurry up. Kiefer let out a sigh, got out, and followed Virda through the dockyard. There were many ships of all shapes and sizes scattered throughout the place. All were inbound traversers. They were all in varying states of repair. Some even lay abandoned for what could have been months, maybe even years, judging by the filth and grime. Kiefer heard metallic clangs and mumbling. He glanced to his left and noticed a Triskani and a human, both disheveled. They were prying pieces from the side of a cloud skimmer. The human stared at them as they passed, but the Triskani continued his work uninterrupted.
Probably just some mechanics fixing their ride.
Virda said.
Keep walking, don't stare.
Verda glanced at him.
Remember, we're here for one thing, and one thing only.
He rattled the container.
Nothing else we see is any of our business or concern.
A loud metallic crack and a bang could be heard just moments later. Kiefer glanced back. The noise seemed to grab the attention of some people nearby. One of them started running towards the cloud skimmer.
Scavs!
He shouted, which attracted the attention of a few others in the vicinity, dressed uniformed, wearing dark red leathers with numerous black patches of armor plating. Without thinking twice, he pulled out his pistol and let off a flurry of shots. Instantly, the human was killed. The Triscani took a few shots, dropped the piece, and started pleading. He was executed on the spot, mid-sentence. The one with the gun caught Kiefer staring.
What? You working with them?
They shouted erratically while aiming their weapon in their direction.
No.
Verda stepped forward.
Do we look like scavs?
He continued.
We're here paying our respects to Bhima, just like everyone else.
The man lowered his weapon and turned his attention back to his vehicle. As he knelt down to retrieve the missing part, more gathered to help. Verda hit Kiefer's upper arm.
What did I just say?
He picked up the pace, gesturing to Kiefer to hurry.
Let's just get in, get out, and get back.
Verda said.
I'd rather not get slabbed.
Inside Bhima's den, repetitive bass rumbled the walls. It was hard to hear his own thoughts, let alone anyone else. The walls were painted red with lights from above. There were a lot of people around, people from every world of free space by the look of it. He didn't make eye contact with anyone as he passed through the crowded main room. Along the outer stretch of the room was a bar being run mainly by Doshans. Emaciated things. They all looked miserable. Nobody seemed to pretend that they were here of their own free will. Numerous people kept them busy. For every drink that went out, it seemed like there were another 3 waiting. Verda and Kiefer walked the length of the bar to avoid the huge dance floor in the center of the room. How anyone could dance or enjoy this place was beyond him, but by the look of it, many people seemed relaxed. Whether it was just chemical sedation remained unknown. In all likelihood, that was the case. Reaching the end of the bar, they turned right to continue the trail, weaving through numerous mismatched seats. Most of them were filled, and nobody made any effort to move out of their way. They descended a few small steps and turned left. They walked down a wide hallway. It was filled with pockets of people. Nobody looked at them as they passed. Anyone who got this far and who was prepared to go further was doing so for one reason alone. As they made it further down the hall, the music got lower, but the thuds that resonated through the building were ever present. They passed through a large set of double doors at the end of the hall. Here, the entire place took a different form. No longer a club, it was now a place of business. Those faces of happy, sedated fools became serious expressions of stressed individuals. The tone of every passing voice and half-heard sentence carried the weight of this place. Along the walkway, there were alcoves to the left. Each one displayed a different scene. The first had a group of people sitting around a table drinking, but having an intense conversation. The second had numerous couches, with too many cushions to count. Sprawled out were countless different people, paying no mind to anyone who passed by. The third held 2 Triscani clad in light armor, pushing, shoving, and arguing quietly, while the body of a young woman lay lifeless on the ground. After the final alcove, the room opened up to a much wider area. A line was formed. Verda and Kiefer joined at the end. On the other side of the room was a platform. Seated on it was a Gnosian. To the left of him were other, albeit smaller, Gnosians, and a few Triscani. To his right was a Triscani holding the chains of 2 Avacyn hounds. Multiple people moved freely, wearing similar armor as those resting atop the platform. They patrolled the area, some with weapons drawn, some without. There was no music, no noise, no talking. Occasionally some sounds could be heard from behind them. But here, the only thing that could be heard was the tapping and nervous jitters of those in the line ahead of them. Near the front of the line, the silence would occasionally be broken by quiet whispers of people presenting Bhima with his tribute. He barely spoke. Instead, he communicated his pleasure with a stiff wave, allowing each person to leave when they finished. A Triskani arrived at them only a few minutes after they joined the queue of people.
Weapons.
He said with a hiss at the end. Verda opened up his jacket to reveal his sidearm. The Triskani took it.
You too.
The Triskani said, as he looked at Kiefer. Kiefer laid a hand on his pistol to unholster it, and the Triskani made a sudden move for his own.
No.
He said. Verda glanced back.
Let him take it out.
He said coldly. Kiefer let his arm fall to his side as the Triskani leaned in and disarmed him. The feeling of being left defenseless in a place like this was disturbing.
You'll get them back on the way out, humans.
He stated before turning away, only to glance back at them. Then his eyes fell to the small container Verda was holding.
You can leave now if you like. I can bring Bhima your tribute.
No.
Verda said with no emotion in his tone. The Triskani walked back to the front of the line. Every so often, another guard would arrive at them, look them up and down, and slowly continue. When a new person joined behind them, the same Triskani would come to disarm them. One person, this time a few people back, was given the same offer as they had been given.
I'll bring your tribute to Bhima.
He said.
Oh, really? Thank you.
The person replied happily through what could only be described as a nervous whisper. They handed it over, were given back their weapon, and they left. Moments later, the Triskani was at a table to the side of the room, rooting through and pocketing the FSTs the person had handed them. Kiefer watched this and noticed some of the other guards laughing as they passed the Triskani to walk briskly back up the walkway. Minutes later, the same person who handed their tribute over was dragged kicking into the main hall, and they were dropped before Bhima.
Tribute.
Bhima said, his voice booming. His speech could only be described as a low, reverb-filled boom, mixed with growls and gargles.
I
The person tried to get the words out.
gave it to one of your guards.
They finally shouted.
No tribute.
Bhima asked. His voice was a mix between a snarl and a growl.
No, I gave it to...
The person was cut off by a gunshot. Laughter ensued from some of the guards. The Avacyn hounds struggled to get at the body, but were held back. Soon, some guards came and dragged the corpse to the right of the queue and through the doors at the side of the platform. The line moved slowly. Bhima was clearly the type of person who wanted to make the most of this particular time of the month. From some, he demanded praise. From others, he threatened for more tribute next month. Some, he just waved his hand to dismiss them, but not before making them stand in uncomfortable silence while he stared at them. Closer to the front, Kiefer could see them a lot clearer. The Triskani, holding back the Avacyn hounds, was heavily scarred. The jaw cap common among them was damaged. Half was missing, revealing teeth and light leathery skin behind, while the other half hung awkwardly lopsided. Bhima was much larger than he previously thought. Kiefer had never seen a Nosian in real life before. They were extremely rare in free space these days. He was large, with thick scales, some missing, and more than a few were painted. Horns protruded from the top of his head. One was broken. One eye was missing, leaving a hollow hole in his face. His snout hung low, filled with layers of teeth, made clear on account of him barely closing his mouth. His upper body was bare, while his lower body was covered in what looked like thick, leathery armor. No boots. Kiefer supposed the massive claw-like nails would have made them impossible to wear. His hands remained resting on the arms of his chair. At his fingertips were long, green-tinted claws. Nosians in general looked menacing, but in a way they also looked like they were in constant pain. They were no more than animals, given enough of a mind to communicate. If a Nosian was a mix-mash of every horrible thing in the galaxy, Bhima was a mix-mash of every horrible Nosian. Two ahead of them was an old Triskani woman, and with her was a shy-looking Doshan girl. As it became their turn, the Triskani stepped forward proudly, dragging the Doshan with her. She was a dainty thing, half-dressed. From behind, he could only see her long auburn hair with two fleshy antennae sticking up from the top of her head.
I present to you,
The Triskani said, confident and loud. She then turned to the Doshan, striking her stomach to make her stand straight.
Come here, girl, present yourself.
She snapped quietly.
I present to you, this Doshan girl. She is still years from her assignment day.
The Triskani chuckled lightly, a horrible wheezing chuckle, throaty and gravelly.
I believe she will make you happy and is more than adequate for 3 months' worth of tribute.
As she spoke, some of the guards stepped up to inspect the Doshan. She flinched at each touch and turned her face from them only to be prodded by the Triskani woman and forced to stand still.
She's been spoiled.
One of the Triskani guards complained with a grunt.
No,
The Triskani mumbled.
she is clean and unspoiled, captured only weeks ago on her homeworld.
She turned back to Bhima and spoke with strained courtesy.
She's spoiled.
The Triskani guard shouted.
You're trying to pass off spoiled meat on Bhima.
He grabbed the Doshan by the hair and dragged her forward.
3 months tribute? I don't think so.
Too much!
Bhima's voice echoed through the silent room.
Yes, too much.
The guard nodded. A few others in the vicinity uttered their agreement.
Not good!
Bhima shouted. The Triskani threw her to the right of the queue, while a few other guards grabbed the Triskani woman and dragged her to the left. The Triskani guard stood over the Doshan and gestured to the Triskani holding the Avacyn hounds before stepping back, leaving her to face them alone. They leapt and lunged at the girl, who shrieked in horror as she stared at them. She slowly backed up.
Please, I will do anything.
She began to cry. The Triskani guard gestured once more, and with that, the Avacyn hounds were given a longer chain. They set upon the girl, who tried to struggle. One clamped onto her arm, while another jumped onto her leg. They struggled against each other, turning the flailing Doshan into a tugging match. Neither would allow the other to have the prize without a fight. She screamed, struggled. She couldn't complete a full sentence. Every word she managed to get out was cut short with a yelp. All of her shirking movements only seemed to draw more blood. Kiefer couldn't watch. He wanted to cover his ears from the horrific noise of snarls and screams, but couldn't. He forced his eyes closed. On their own, however, his eyes would open and he'd catch another glimpse of the gruesome sight. Many of the other guards jumped up and rushed to get a better look. Some others in line started to laugh. The Triskani who gestured for this to happen started to take bets.
Which one will give her death?
He shouted as people started to cast their predictions. Kiefer looked at the Triskani woman, who seemed to be fretting, not for what was happening to the Doshan, but most likely because of what may happen to her. A crunch caught his attention, and he turned to see that one of her arms had been snapped. It flayed effortlessly with each tug of the hound's head. It continued to gnaw and pull until the skin gave way with a horrific squelch. A pool of blood fell from the dismemberment. Her voice was strained from the screaming. The anguish was unbearable to hear. If he still had his sidearm, he would have shot her to end her suffering. One of the hounds dived for her throat, and within a few moments it was over. The Avacyn hound reeled back from her, and a mass of flesh and muscle came away too. She was left still, other than twitching, while the hounds continued to fight over the remains. Upon her death, some guards cheered, and some more complained for having lost their bets. It was all over. The crowd of guards dispersed. The crunching and snarls continued, and everything went back to business as usual. Bhima gestured to the Triskani woman, who was then dragged past the body, the hounds snapping at them, defending their meal. Then she disappeared behind the door to the right of the platform. Only one person ahead of them now, a human. They stepped forward, their feet tapping as they came to a stop.
I think you'll like this.
He said, while producing a small container.
It's something very special. For Bima's eyes only.
He got to one knee and held the small container above his head, waiting for someone to take it. Bima twisted in his seat. Gesturing to one of the guards, a Triskani moved to take it from the man. The guard, looking like he was about to open it, but with that, Bima growled his disapproval, which snapped the guard's attention back to him as he rushed to pass it over. With the container in hand, he weighed it with his palm outstretched.
Light.
He stated, before running his sharp claws over it and working the lock.
Your final gift for all of the pain you've inflicted.
The man said solemnly to himself. His words received no reaction from Bima or any of his guards who were too busy staring at the container. Virda's head shot up from the ground, and he backed up, shoving Kiefer as he did, forcing him to back up too. An explosion threw Virda, Kiefer, and the others behind them backwards. It eclipsed Bima in fire. The flames turned to smoke and dust, obscuring all vision. From the ground, all he could do was stare through the devastation. He couldn't hear, but knew there was shouting. It sounded as if the noise was coming from 2 rooms away. Movement from beneath made him push against the floor to crawl away. Ringing overpowered all other sounds, gradually becoming louder as he moved.
Virda!
Kiefer shouted. He couldn't hear the words, but he could feel the speech in his jaw. Kiefer felt a hand grab the scruff of his jacket. It wrenched him from the ground. As he looked up, he could see a disoriented Avacyn hound staring at him as the smoke cleared. The creature bared its teeth. Blood coated its fangs and mouth. Piercing beady eyes locked onto his, and it lunged forward, snapping as it did. Kiefer, now on his feet, backed up. Stumbling over something, he fought the fall and remained standing, not losing sight of the hound. As he continued to move back, he saw the person he tripped over, someone else who came to pay tribute. The hound stepped forward still, then it stared at the person on the floor. It dived on them instinctively. He felt himself being shoved backwards. Virda, covered in dust, shouted something, but Kiefer couldn't make it out. Pushed once more, he came to his senses, and the 2 of them took off running. Before turning the corner back to the walkway, Kiefer looked back to where Bima had sat. It was just a blank space, now inhabited only by a fleshy mass of charred remains. As they staggered through the hall, many others seemed to have the same idea. The explosion must have been felt throughout the whole complex. It marked a time to leave, especially for those forced to be here. In the transport, the ringing finally quieted down. He stared back at the building. The lights were still on, but now smoke billowed from it. People scattered in all directions. More seemed to leave with each passing minute.
You think you can fly yet?
Virda asked, his voice still somewhat muffled, but audible.
Yeah, I think so.
Kiefer replied as he looked at the control panel.
Think it would be worth going back for the tribute?
Kiefer chuckled. He wasn't serious, but couldn't help but imagine the sheer amount of money and valuables that were in there.
Bima won't be needing it anymore.
I hadn't thought of that.
Virda said as he stared past Kiefer.
We'd have to put down those hounds, not to mention any guards that are left alive. Also, every merc, scav, and slinger will be looking to take their piece of the fortune.
They stayed silent for a moment. Kiefer let his mind wander with possibilities.
Even a portion of it could pay for us all to get out of West Sec. Maybe even off-world entirely. Set ourselves up somewhere else doing something better.
Kiefer mumbled to himself.
Make a legitimate living from illegitimate gains.
Kiefer noticed Virda move out of the corner of his eye. He turned to see him fumble with his communicator.
Sonic, yeah, it's me.
He spluttered and coughed.
Listen, something happened. We have a job. Round everyone up, get armed, and get to Bemis. Fast.
He continued.
Sonic, listen to me, he's dead. Get down here fast. There's a serious time constraint on this one.
Virda locked eyes with Kiefer and grinned.
The take will be massive.
He put his communicator down.
Everyone is running out, and we're dumb enough to run in.
Kiefer shook his head at the thought of it, but in the back of his mind, he knew it would be worth the risk.